Welcome to SciTech Culture with Steve Kern and Ben Warner, where we examine science, technology and culture in the 21st century. Visit our website at scitechculture.com.
Well, tried and tried again. We finally eventually got to a stage where we're recording. We did try and do an outdoor episode today, or at least me being outdoors, but had a few trials and tribulations this morning with connections and stuff, and it was just a indication that technology doesn't always work the way it should, even in 2021.
Yeah, it's hard to believe, isn't it? But, I guess it's true. Who knows? Maybe there was too much sunlight in the atmosphere or something like that.
Yeah, but I'm planning on trying to reestablish that shot that I had set up this morning where I had a nice, park background with the sun and everything. But I'll make sure that...
We'll do that next week.
We'll get that next week, I'm sure. All right, so... just before, we're going to talk about the Snyder Cut a bit later of Justice League, because, that's the hot cultural topic at the moment, at least as far as the comic book fan base anyway. But just before we get into that, we have to touch on this Justin Long Intel ads thing that he's been doing. And for those that don't remember, he was the I'm a Mac guy from the Mac versus PC ads. And there's a certain... curiosity to these ads that, to me, he kind of looks like he's being held hostage, even though he's probably being paid $1 gazillion to, claim that Intel-based Windows PCs are far better than what the M1 Macs are. And yes, they've taken certain points of view to highlight that, there are, like, for instance, form factor advantages. You don't get as much variety with a Mac, or you don't get gaming on the Mac, or the M1 Macs don't currently support it, like multiple external monitors and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. But the thing that kind of got to me was, one, the specific selection of him was a very targeted sort of approach to Intel to fight back against what Apple was doing. And to be fair, I don't know if selecting him was really necessarily the right way to go about it. But on the other side, I do appreciate that Apple was quite liberal with their interpretation of data in their keynote presentation about, their 98%, the M1's 98% faster than, every other chip on the that exists, even though they didn't have any numbers or data to support it. So it's like anything it's like an argy-bargy around, who's better and all that sort of thing. But I don't entirely know if Intel's strategy taking this particular track was really the right way to go about it. I think they still could have had the same message, but just done differently.
Well, maybe, but I would say by now Intel are desperate. They know they've really parked their chip design up a one-way creek or something without a paddle, and they're, I guess so. What else can you do except go on the offensive and point out all the gimmicks that you can get on other people's PCs, because they don't even make the PCs; they just put a chip in them. And I think anyone who's used Apple products appreciates their simplicity and clean-cut, simple designs, and they don't need hinged folding screens and touch screens on their laptops, because we all know that once you sit down to use a laptop, you don't use any of those gimmicky features.
Yeah, and the other thing I think is there's a bit of noise here, because, the M1, I think there was a bit of rhetoric when it first came out that kind of suggested that it was like the death knell of, Intel-based Windows PCs or whatever. And I think the M1 is great for the Mac. It's not necessarily great for the Windows PC. It's not a one-for-one comparison, because Windows and Windows PCs are doing their own thing, and if maybe it's just a question of maybe just the M1 represents a philosophical push to get Intel to look at things differently and perhaps properly compete and come out with something that is comparable, I guess, for lack of a better term.
I mean, I think Apple were pretty upfront about their, split with Intel, and Intel must have known first, and Intel must have known that, Apple were going down the chip design they were going, and in the 3 years or whatever it's been, they've done nothing. So, they've stuck to their guns, and it's great. what they were doing was great 20 years ago, and I think they've got caught with their pants down, to be honest. I think you make a good point. Apple are designing a chip for Apple users and the Apple ecosystem, and Intel just makes a chip to warm your lap while you sit a laptop on it. So you choose what you want, what gimmicks, what features. I'm long past being an Apple fanboy these days, but I think the reality is that there's no contest. Intel's desperate, and they're not going to win by throwing rocks at Apple.
Yeah, and I should also point out that they're probably facing competition from AMD and the Ryzen chips that are coming out, because they seem quite impressive as well. So, like you said, maybe all of this swirling around will just kick them into gear to actually, get back on their game again.
Well, that's it. They're a long way behind now, but that's sometimes a good thing if it means that they find their feet and come back with an even better product in 2 or 3 years.
Absolutely.
If they still exist.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll see how Justin Long's reputation goes as far as that's concerned too.
So he was getting a roasting on YouTube. I loved it.
Absolutely. All right. So the main topic we're going to talk about today is the Snyder Cut, the Justice League sort of new version that was just released. And there's a lot of things that are quite interesting about this. Not necessarily about the film itself per se, but I guess what it represents in terms of the fact that it represents a second version of the same film, one that was already released 3 years ago. It's not quite the same, but it's sort of a similar situation as what happened with Superman 2 back in the day, where there was an original director who filmed almost 80% of it, then got summarily, the Superman 2 director, Richard Donner, got summarily dismissed. I think in this case with Zack Snyder, the Justice League director, he had to actually leave for personal reasons, which were quite tragic. But the net effect, of course, is that there was this whole other film that was sitting in cans somewhere that never saw the light of day because the incoming director completely changed it. And subsequently, you get 2 different versions. So in the Superman 2 case, many years later, I believe it was in 06 or 07, Donner went back and did his own cut of it, even though it wasn't a complete film because there were sequences that he hadn't shot. But in this particular case with Justice League, the whole film exists. I believe there was like 2 or 3 days of tangential reshooting or something, but for the most part it was all existing footage that just got recut and tweaked and polished and made into a 4-hour opus for streaming. And I just find it's interesting, and I think in today's world of streaming, it opens up a possibility of variations, because unlike with cinemas, which probably only had the capacity to show the one version one time, streaming is just an endless database of stuff that you can watch, and you could potentially have multiple versions of things now.
Oh, you're spot on. I just want to take a backward step here quickly, Ben, because you and I know, what Hollywood's like, and there are all sorts of stories, about films, pressure from the studio changing films. So let's just go back to the 2017 version, and, half of it stays in the can. It only comes out, it's only 120 minutes long, et cetera, et cetera. There's no explanation of why that happened, but it's, when you get a replacement director in, they can be hired with explicit instructions from the studio saying, we don't want to show half that stuff, we only want it to be this length, and we only want you to show this story arc, and that's it. So, I believe one of the instructions was to make it more humorous, from what I understand. Exactly. So I haven't seen the original, but you imagine, anyone can imagine themselves in there where the film's sort of, predominantly being shot. There's a whole lot of material to choose from, and you get employed on the basis that you're going to do what some cigar smoking or chomping producer tells you to, and make it funny, because that's what I like. So, and you're right. So a cinema can't really, or people can't afford to watch one version one day and then come back and spend another $18 the next to watch the same film but slightly different. And this is where I think that this is actually a landmark achievement, by releasing the 4-hour film in this way, this is Hollywood once again being more clever than the rest of us. Over the COVID era, we've seen the whole problem with cinema releases and what is a film, and do they need to go to the silver screen first, or should we just boot them out down the pipes? And this is the perfect solution. So they're making out it's a redux. They're making out that this is the real deal that you should have seen, 4 years ago. They're making you cry because this is beautiful, and a DOP who had half of his magnificent work lost finally gets to share it with us. It's a wonderful story, but it's all Hollywood hype. And the thing is that what they're doing is they're changing the way we think about film. This is a very long film. It's got 7 chapters in it. Now, that doesn't mean that the film ends or stops at the end of those chapters. But, gee, if you're watching it at home, that's a handy place to press pause.
Indeed. And I guess the funny story about this is the fact that apparently there was some sort of contractual issue by because they had investigated doing literally splitting it into episodes, just like a limited streaming series, but apparently they couldn't do it because it was going to screw up all the contracts with the talent attached to the film, which is hilarious. And the director just in the end said, "Look, I don't want to make this difficult. I don't want the lawyers in here. Just let me make my 4-hour opus and just chuck it out there."
And yet the hilarious flip side to this is that if he'd tried to put 4 hours into a cinema, he would have been told you can't go past 128 minutes.
And that's the funny thing, because I ended up watching it in about 2 sittings over the course of the past 2 days. And
where'd you press pause, Ben?
At the chapter points, funny enough. It's actually quite good because it just cuts to black and then it goes to part 2 or part 3 or whatever. So it was very handy to be able to do that. The interesting thing is that when I watched the original one, I didn't think it was all right, but for me, I thought, given what it was supposed to be about, it underserved the concept, which makes sense because given all the backdoor drama about the production and everything, you could tell that the whole thing had been gutted. If you just watched it as a piece of fun entertainment or whatever, then I don't think it does fine. But as that big tentpole Hollywood event, it definitely fell short. This new cut is definitely way too long, but I will say that it's a vast improvement because that sort of epic Hollywood event sort of vibe to it is back. So you can tell, and because it's sort of not just a film on its own, it's in a series of films that it matches up with the previous films that were created in the series, like tonally, story-wise, it all kind of made a lot more sense. And the only thing I would say is that obviously because they said, it's going to streaming, so have at it, you can make it as long as you like. Obviously that led to an indulgence.
Look, I think and I haven't seen the film. I'm probably not going to. I'm probably not that interested, but I'm always happy to hear that a film's vision has been realised, especially if I don't have to sit through 4 hours of it. And I think the good thing here, though, is the story that I'm hearing is it's repaired the franchise or the damage done by, I guess, a film that didn't probably resonate with its audience and probably didn't resonate true to its theme. I mean, Justice League is a great theme, to have all your superheroes there, working together. That's what everyone wants. It's no different to people wanting to see Alien versus Predator. And when it's not done right, people get upset. So if this version is fixing that, I'm all for it.
Absolutely. The other aspect I wanted to touch on too was just this concept of the fan base basically making this happen, because it started as a social media kind of following, and it largely, because at the time it was all very hush hush. So the director leaves, and then another one comes in, and then this kind of myth built that there must be, if one director came in, there must, the other director must have had a whole bunch of stuff on the floor that must have, why can't he just go back and reassemble it all? And they kind of started in like that, and then as the socials do, they let it explode into a movement where it became a hashtag, which was the hashtag Snyder Cut.
Yeah, well, that's it. And I think what's really exciting, I guess, now about film is, you look at some of the reduxes that we saw back in the 80s and 90s, and they took 10 or 15 years to come out. And this is really the same thing. This is a director being able to come back, revisit their film, and create what they originally intended to create. So it's a great story in itself. But what's different these days now is with socials, the fans can get on board and the fans can make this happen. And that's what I mean. This might not be a film for me, but if the fan base make this happen, if the fan base can draw this, then that's got to be a fan.
Yeah, absolutely. The funny thing is that, again, I was just imagining, if I had to watch this for 4 hours in a cinema, and it reminded me again that, although I guess I was watching it on a smaller screen, being at home, I didn't feel like I missed anything by not having been in the actual cinema itself. And I think that we've talked about this before. I think it's just a thing about the technology that is available to be purchased in your home to create a streaming experience or a cinematic experience where you don't need to go to the cinema for it. And on top of that, because it was in a non-standard sort of format length, it was perfectly fine for it to be 4 hours.
That's right.
When you're watching it at home like that.
And in a cinema, we all know that they don't go to these longer formats unless it's a blockbuster because they can't afford to have less sessions. So, the outcome is good in this regard. But, gee, what a way. What a way to have to endure it, hey? Over 2 days. Still, that's the new breed for film.
And I just had to love the, I don't know if you want to call it pretentiousness of it or not, but it was presented in a 1.33 to 1 aspect ratio, and apparently that best represents a comic book panel. So well, there you go. Not since I saw whatever it was, that Lighthouse movie, I think a year ago, have I been so tortured. I didn't like seeing black bars or the black sides on the screen, but okay, fair enough. If me being the old cinephile, I'll say that the only filmmaker that could get away with that aspect ratio is Stanley Kubrick. I think he was the only one that actually could compose for that image well. Having said that, it was well shot and everything, but I just thought it was quite funny because it's they literally gave him the license to do it exactly the way he wanted, which, going back to your further point about Hollywood messing around with their product, that's a rare thing to have happen. If the fans are behind it and you're streaming it, then I think Hollywood now is going to loosen up a bit. So we may well see some other interesting releases. Maybe Peter Jackson will come back and stitch all 3 Lord of the Rings into one, 10-hour opus. That would be a very interesting sitting, and there will be people out there that will devote 10 hours watching it from start to finish that way. You bet. Absolutely. All right, we might wrap it up there, and we'll see how that goes. It's an interesting time for entertainment, etc., and I'm kind of curious. I think we're still only at the beginning of streaming, I think, and also the potential for what they could actually produce for it. Very true. And I guess we'll see more of this now over the coming years. Absolutely. So don't forget our website, SciTechCulture.com. You can get all of our links and content there and watch our videos, stream us on all of your devices, etc. And we greatly appreciate your visits to our website. All right, so that's it for this episode. We'll catch you next time.